Hello friends, welcome. Friends, today I am going to take you through India's GDP growth projections. Friends, the reason I am doing this video is I have been tracking India's GDP growth from the very beginning when I started, analyzing this subject, and I have done some videos on this subject in past. Somehow I am not very satisfied with those videos because those videos turned out to be very complex. And since GDP is a highly technical subject, so what I thought is I'd like to explain this subject in as simple terms as possible so that the viewers can understand what should be the realistic growth numbers which we can assume, so that we not only can be aspirational but also realistic in setting our goals so that those goals can be achieved in near future. Because any goal that we set, if those goals are unrealistic, then it doesn't serve any purpose, because we won't be driven towards those goals from the point of view of achieving it, because that's the basic fundamental principles on setting goals. Okay, now because this is a technical subject, again I repeat, what I've done is that I have used the most basic tools to make some projections. Now, as I take you through these projections, I'm going to give you rationalities as to why a certain method is assumed and why that method is going to work. That also I'm going to explain to you, and you will see for yourself that that method is not going to be very, it doesn't going to give you any projections which is going to go haywire. And I'm going to prove that by using the past numbers. Now, I would like to first take you through this Excel sheet so that make you understand what this Excel sheet is all about. Now, this Excel sheet has got multiple rows. The first row I have kept blank just to basically have more clarity and some space for my face. And then I have started from the row number 2. Now, row number 2 is very, very clear. It's just pointing to the financial years of the 4 quarters which are laid out in this Excel sheet, starting from FY12. Everybody understand financial year, right? It starts from 1st April of a particular year, ends in 31st March in the next year. Then we have the corresponding date, means which is denoting the quarter of that financial year. Then we have the row which is listing out the nominal GDP numbers in rupees lakh crores for that quarter. Mind you, it is a nominal GDP, which is referred to the data which the Government of India announces every year, which called GDP current. And then there is another data which is also gets announced in parallel with the same announcement, which is called GDP constant. Now, what is the difference between GDP constant and GDP current? GDP constant is calculated based on a rupee value of the start of the GDP series. So, for example, if the GDP series started in FY12 or FY11, there was a value of rupee in FY11. That reference rate is fixed, and therefore whatever number, the growth number we see in the last quarter, last financial year, which is FY24, is measured on the value of rupee in FY11. Now, that gives a real growth of GDP. So whatever number that you see with the Government of India or the newspapers report that India's GDP grew at 8% last quarter, those are using the real GDP, which is measured with the rupee value of the start of the series. Now, there is another GDP called nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is the GDP which is the value of goods and service, the definition of GDP, at the current value of rupee. For example, in FY24, whatever GDP number came out, that value is being measured on the rupee value in FY24. Now, when you are calculating GDP in dollars, you don't use real GDP. You use nominal GDP because that is more efficient. Because the dollar to rupee rate is a number which we get every quarter or every day. So it is not correct to use real GDP because the rupee value is tagged at the beginning of the series, right? So therefore what I have done is that I have aggregated the nominal GDP value in row number 4, which is measured in lakh crores. And then we have the USD rate averaged out for a quarter. Now if you see FY12 first quarter, the GDP value in rupees lakh crore is 20.44 and the USD rate is 44.62. So if you divide this by this, that is this number by this number, you will get the GDP in trillion dollars. So every quarter the GDP in trillion dollar has been calculated. Now I'll show you what the number looks like. So if you add up this GDP trillion dollar for FY12, you can see this number is 1.78 lakh crores. 1.78 trillion dollars. Now if you add the next number, next four, it is 1.82 trillion dollars. So our GDP in the beginning part of the series was 1.78 trillion dollar and then it became 1.82 trillion dollar and now today where it stands at 3.55 trillion dollar. So it's very clear, it's very simple sheet. Okay. Then the last row is the growth rate of our GDP. Now this is very important because for forecast I have used the growth rate for GDP. Now you will see the growth rate, which is what is growth rate? 1.82 minus 1.78 divided by 1.78, which gives you 2.2%, right? So in the beginning part of the quarter of our series, for the financial year FY13, we grew at only 2%. Reason we grew at such a small rate, even though you will find that our GDP growth in nominal terms has been consistent. The reason our growth rate was only 2.2% is because of the depreciation of rupee. Can you see? The average rate was 51.24 and suddenly it became 55.72, right? So when the rupee depreciates very fast, our GDP in dollar terms also goes down. So that is why you will find that these numbers are changing drastically. Like there was a huge depreciation of rupee in FY14 also, and therefore the growth rate is only 0.5%, right? On a yearly basis. Now our rupee appreciated in FY15, therefore the growth number is 10.7%. See, so that is how it is. The growth numbers of 0.5%, 10%, it is highly dependent upon the rupee dollar rate. So what I have done is that you will see that these numbers have been changing very drastically for every year, right? Sometimes it is minus 4.6% because of COVID, and then it becomes 17.9% because of the low base, and then the economy became normalized after COVID, and then today the growth rate stands at around 6.6%. So what I've done is that rather than taking these numbers individually, I have averaged it out, and then I put it a number here, average of 6.1%. Now what makes me think that this is the right thing to do? Because you need to check whether these average assumption that you are making for future projection, which is 6.1% I'm going to take as a reference rate, is the right thing to do. So it is better to check with real numbers because already the numbers we have. So what I will do is I will take this as a base, 1.78 trillion dollar as a base, apply this number 6.1%, and we have how many years we have? We are basically, if you see here, you are starting from FY12 minus FY23, FY24. So 12 years, right? So 12 years. So if I do 12 years, so actually it should be 12 years, not 13 years. So 12 years. So you see 3.6%. Say it's 3.6 trillion dollars. Now what is our growth? What is our real GDP in trillion dollars now? 3.55. Can you see that it closely matches? So it starts from what? 1.78 trillion dollars, and if you take an average growth rate, I'm basically using 6.1%, and then 12 years of the time, it comes out to be 3.6 trillion dollars, which matches with 3.55 trillion dollars. So it is. So now you get it, right? So it is not a faulty assumption to make on an average dollar growth rate. So we should be well within our right to use this number 6.1%, which if we are making a longer projection for 10 years, not a shorter projection, because shorter projections, numbers can change depending upon the rupee dollar rate. So let's say if I am making a projection for 2 years, I can't take 6.66%. I might take a different numbers, right? Because sometimes the GDP is going to grow in dollar terms a very high rate depending upon dollar to rupee rate. Sometimes it will be low, as we have seen in the past. So let's assume a number of which will be aspirational, also of realistic. Let's assume 7%, and let's do a 2 years projection, that is FY26. So in 2 years, if we are growing at 7% in dollar terms, then we will be at what? This is what the calculation shows. If I put 2 year, this is FY26, and this is the growth rate by assuming this as a reference. See, if I do the formula, this is a reference, and then it takes 7%. So we will be a $4 trillion economy in next 2 years, right? But if we are making a projection for 10 years, I don't think the 7% growth rate is the correct. We probably have to take a growth rate of 6.5%, because even if we become aspirational, if we start to do good things and we start to behave responsibly, our past experience shows when we had favorable terms, monsoon was great, sometimes the oil prices were also reasonable, right? So still under those favorable conditions, we actually have done 6.1% average growth in dollar terms, right? So let's assume that we will do 6.5%, right, in dollar terms. So you can see that we will be in next 10 years $6.66 trillion economy, right? Now, if you are going to assume, let's make it a little bit more optimistic. Let's make it 7.5%. Now, if you make 7.5% in next 10 years, by FY34 will be a $7.3 trillion economy. Now, if I make it 8%, we will be $7.66 trillion economy in next 10 years. If I make it 10%, I'm showing you all the numbers so that you can see where we will stand. So if you make it 10%, we will be a $9.2 trillion economy. But 10% is a highly unrealistic number on a consistent basis for every year in 10. As we have saw in last 12 years, we did only 6.1%. So doing 10% is going to be highly unrealistic. Now, let's assume that we will do 10%. I'll give it to you. Let's give it to us. Okay. Then what is going to happen in next 13 years? Now, next 13 years, we are definitely not going to do 10%. That is for sure, because it has been seen that when the base becomes very high, the numbers will go low, growth numbers. So, assume that we grow at the same rate today, at 6%. We are still not going to be a $30 trillion economy. Can you see that? In next 13 years, by FY27. So, having aspirational, of India becoming a $30 trillion economy has to be grounded on reality. If you ask me, we would be doing a 7% here, right? If we do very good, and then we will be doing a 5% growth rate in next 13 years. By FY47, we will be just at $13.16 trillion economy if these numbers are going to stand. Now, in order for us to achieve $15 trillion economy, we should have to do 7.5% in dollar terms and 5%. Even if we do 5% in dollar term in next 10 years after FY34, will still be 13.78%, right? Because when I calculate 13.78%, what I am doing is I am assuming this as the base, and then I am calculating on the base. I have broken down the time frame from current to FY47 into two pieces, 10 years and 13 years. Right? So you can see that how difficult it is. So we have to, let's make it 6% then here, this one. We will achieve, so if you do 7.5% for 10 years and then 6% for 13 years, we will be at how much? $15.59 trillion economy. We're still not going to be a $30 trillion economy by FY27. So friends, you can see the numbers yourself. So whenever we talk about numbers, we have to be realistic with the numbers, not because I'm not politically driven. I'm not basically siding with any lobby, etc. here. I am giving you the reality, and that is why, because we as an Indian, our reality is more important than living in some kind of illusion. We have to be realistic with what we can achieve, And we have, because if we are realistic, then we have to strive towards achieving those numbers. We cannot be just throwing some numbers and then sleeping after that and dreaming that India has become a $30 trillion economy. Okay, so that was the purpose of this video, and I hope that you understood. And then I thank you for watching till the end, and I'll come back with a new video next time. Thank you very much.